Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on updates impacting ResNet HERS Index in 2025. We're pleased to have with us Gayatri Vijayakumar and Neil Cruz to talk with you about the upcoming changes. As usual, what we'll do is allow them to go through their presentation, which will be recorded and made available to all registrants post-webinar, along with the slides. And we will then have some time for those questions towards the end and answer as many as we can. Please enter your questions into the question box on the screen. And again, we'll try to get to them as many as we can. And we'll try to add some links and things in the chat throughout so you can also stay up to date on some of those links as well. With that, Gayatri, you're free to start.
All right, thanks, Valerie. So for those of you who registered for the prior webinar, so this is a part 2 in a 2-part series. So if you'd registered and heard from John Hensley and Charla, they were talking about updates impacting the ResNet HERS from the context of changes to the ResNet standards. So today what Neil and I are going to cover are things more specific to the HERS rating itself, as well as the HERS index. These are all changes that are coming in 2025. Sometime last year, ResNet proposed a switch from the current standards to the next suite of standards. And so those are the changes that are happening this year. And that's the point of these two webinars. So I'm going to go through the first half of today talking about the standards, and then Neil's going to pick up on the impacts that these changes to the standards have actually on the HERS index. So where are we right now? If you are doing HERS ratings on homes or buildings and they have building permit dates before July 1st, you are still using these 2019 standards. So 301 2019 governs the HERS index and the calculations for the actual index. 380 2019 is how you do your blower door, duct blaster, and ventilation airflow. And then ACA 310 2020 if you're doing HVAC grading. So right now, up until building permits in July, these are the standards that you use. So starting on or after July 1st. So for homes and buildings with HERS ratings on or after July 1st, based on building permit dates, they will be moving to this next suite of standards, the 2022 standards of 301 and 380. And so I have a little asterisk on the building permit dates. So building permit date could be the sale of the home, it could be the rater's first inspection, it could be the application for the permit. There's a bunch of dates that can be used, but basically I'm just saying building permit dates just to get a understanding of what's changing this year, and it's all happening July 1st. So the point of this webinar is to make sure you're prepared for those changes. They might not affect you right away on July, but it's going to probably affect you at some point this year. So if you want to look for those alternate dates, you would be going to the MNHERS standards. So MNHERS, that's the ResNet proprietary standards. What I showed you on the screen before are ANSI standards. So these are two different types of standards. And so this is the first link I'm going to have Valerie put into the chat for you so you can get straight to the ResNet standards. Now the ResNet standards point to the ANSI standards as the technical basis for calculating the HERS index and for doing all the testing that we just talked about. And so if you're looking at this ResNet standard in chapter 3, way back when, all the technical calculations used to live right here in chapter 3, but now they're just pointers to ANSI ResNet 301. So you can see on the screen right now, it's still a pointer to 2019, and they'll all change starting July 1, when this will become a pointer to 2022. Another thing you guys might see in various emails from ResNet are addendums. So we call these MNHERS addendum, right? So these are MNHERS addendum that will have numbers associated with them. That's how ResNet will modify how they are using or requiring the use of ANSI 301 for calculating your HERS index. And so the ANSI standards can take a little longer to change. That 2019 standard was printed over 6 years ago. And so as raters use it, as software implement it, changes are needed. And so you can change that in two ways, by amending the ANSI standard or by amending the ResNet standard. So whenever ResNet amends a standard, you'll see it here in chapter 3 under 303. So you'll see them shown as various exceptions. We want to create an exception to the calculations in 301, and they reside here in the MNHERS standards. And this is only for the use for HERS ratings. So in developing 2022, which is again what you'll be using for permits as of July 1, how did we go about this process? So 2019 was published 6 years ago. Since then, we've had a lot of amendments. And so those amendments are characterized as addendums, and they have letters associated with them. So if you take anything away from today to differentiate between a change to an ANSI standard, you're looking at addendums with letters. If you're looking at a change to a RESNET standard, those are MNHERS addendum, and those have numbers. So when we developed ANSI 301 2022, we did start off with the print copy of 2019, and we've amended it 4 different times. So addendum A, you might not have even noticed, but it introduced different defaults for clothes washers and dryers and dishwashers, and behind the scenes changed some of the calculations for those appliances. Addendum B introduced HVAC grading. You saw that 310 standard was actually published in 2020. So we actually had to create an amendment so that the HERS rating could use that standard. Addendum C, this introduced some duct leakage testing defaults. And then addendum D introduced the CO2 index. So while it might feel a little scary to be jumping to the 2022 edition, you've actually been using a lot of what's already in that document through the addendums A, B, C, and D here, as well as other MNHERS addendum. Interpretations are also folded into 301 2022. If you as a rater, if you submitted an interpretation, something that wasn't clear in the 2019 edition, we try to make those clear in the 2022 before we publish it. Like I mentioned, the MNHERS addenda. One good example here is the switch to HSPF2 and SEER2. Those weren't known when we published 2019, but they came onto the scene, and we had to create a MNHERS addendum to allow the software to use them and for raters to use them. And then also there's other changes. Our committees are always working and thinking about different ways to improve the standard, but all of this has to be sent out for public comment. And so if the public agrees to the changes or wants them refined, we adjust. But at the end of the day, we published 2022 about 3 years ago. So we're jumping to the use of a standard that was published already 3 years ago. And so that document here, you can access that print copy from 3 years ago. This link is here. I'm going to ask that Valerie post that in the chat. If you haven't already bookmarked it, it's a good bookmark. But the challenge with it is printed at one point in time and frozen in time. And then we changed it. So ANSI 301 2022, even though you haven't used it yet, has also been amended 4 times through 4 different addenda. So addendum A, this one introduced the concept of a renewable energy certificate, and I'll talk about what that means later. Addendum B refined some of the things that were introduced to the CO2 index. Addendum C actually introduces an appendix C that has some modeling assumptions that we wanted to create consistency. Neil is the chair of our software consistency committee, and there were some modeling assumptions that needed to be codified within 301 2022 so that all software calculating the HERS index were using the same default modeling assumptions. And so that's been documented with this appendix. And then there is a standard out that isn't, or an addendum out that is still under development. That's addendum D. It hasn't been finalized, so it won't be required for use in July, but you might be familiar with it. It's proposing to make some changes to how you grade insulation. So that one's not finalized, so it will not be required as of July 1. But A, B, C, and this final one, letter E. Addendum E introduces some changes for homes that use central fan integrated systems to bring outdoor air through an air handler. So there's some calculations and new requirements. So when we're talking about what's changing in July 1, it's everything that's in this frozen print copy of 2022, which is a lot of stuff that you've already been accustomed to actually doing. You might not know it, but you've been using it, as well as these 4 new addendum. And then any new MNHERS addendum that ResNet might be showing as exceptions in that document. We did see a couple slight edits in 380 2022, and those are also folded into here. Not too many make a big impact on the HERS index, right? So this is just some procedural changes that you will also have to do in July. And that link to Valerie, if you could pop that one into the chat, now you'll have access to the 2022 copies. These are free online viewers offered by ICC. Okay, so I want to talk about what these changes are. The blue, I'm going to use blue text throughout the slides. As Valerie mentioned, this is going to be available to you as a PowerPoint or a PDF. So you're going to have these slides. So just remember everything I'm talking about in blue text. You'll see them on the slides. These are changes that are going to directly affect you as a rater. So I'm assuming most of you are listening that are raters. And so this is geared towards you. So I want to talk about things that might change about what you do when you're in the field or when you're reviewing plans or when you're actually entering information into the modeling software. So this is all about changing your habits or practices to keep up with the changes in 2022. If I see something that might not affect your practice, but it might happen behind the scenes, it's software implementing a change, I'll have that in purple text, but most of that is something that Neil is going to cover towards the end of the presentation. So some of these might not even affect you if you don't have the systems that were impacted by the change. So for example, if you have solar or other renewable energy on site and it's being modeled, right? So if you have that, this will affect you. If you don't, it doesn't. So this is about that renewable energy certificate. So this was an addendum to 2022. So when you look at the print copy online, the free viewer, you will not see anything about a renewable energy certificate. So this is just a documentation step that if you have on-site solar, for example, you'll have to document whether the renewable energy certificate was retired, retained, sold, and if you don't know, you just have an option for unknown. Now, this step does not have an impact on the HERS index. Again, you won't see this in the copy online that Valerie's going to put in the chat, but this is what the language would look like from that addendum. So you're just documenting what you know about the renewable energy certificate. Now, if you have on-site solar and you have a battery backup, so now you've got on-site battery storage, there are some elements of that storage, that piece of equipment that you're going to have to document. So you're going to have to look at the storage type, the usable kWh capacity, round trip efficiency. There's elements of that system that you will have to document as a rater, and it can affect the ERI calculation. So again, this is another one that you won't see in the print copy online, but this language is what would affect your day-to-day practice if you see those systems in the homes that you rate. So moving on to envelopes. So these changes should affect everyone because everyone's rating a home that has an envelope. So the first one is documenting the color of exterior walls. So this might not seem like a big deal. This is one that you actually would see if you open up that link that Valerie put in the chat and you would navigate to this section. You're probably used to documenting the color as light, medium, or dark. And through the Software Consistency Committee, they realized they needed more specific colors for that. And so it's switching to colors like white and light gray and silver. So you'll have to collect that piece of information when you're in the field. As well as the orientation of exterior walls. This is just kind of a shift in practice. You've been documenting the orientation of windows and then assigning them to walls. Now you're just going to have to reorient how you do things, and you're going to document the orientation of the exterior walls specifically. Now, this home does not show this, but if you had a through-wall air conditioner or one of those through-wall package terminal ACs or package terminal heat pump units, you see these a lot in multifamily. They might be the size of half of one of these windows in this home. So that reflects a impact in the envelope. And so starting with ratings in July 1, you'll be documenting that big hole in the wall using R2 or less. The next two envelope changes are how you document the roof. So you're going to be documenting roof shape, and it's possible that some of your software has done this proactively, but you might see different drop downs in your software for the roof shape, as well as roof eave geometry. So the roof eaves, there's going to be additional inputs. You can see this image. You're going to collect some additional inputs about the roof eave so that the software can calculate whether there's a D rate in that insulation that is needed. So sticking with envelope, this one is more about documentation, not so much about how you model things. There were some questions. So through an interpretation question, you as a rater can submit a request because you don't think the standard is clear. And this is what happened here. A rater did that. And so it comes back that, yes, if you don't have NFRC labels or listings, you are able to use signed and dated documentation from the manufacturer. So that need to be clarified. Even that might be understood by most people. You actually had to put the words in the standard in order to be able to officially be able to use it. So through an interpretation request, we interpreted and said this is okay. in Appendix B, I'm assuming a lot of you are already familiar with 301. So Appendix B has the on-site inspection procedures. So in there's also a change that expands where else you can get default U factors and solar heat gains for your windows. You can use either of these two options on the right, LBL ResFen or efficient window selection tool. All right, so again, talking about certain things that you might not see in every one of your homes, but if you have ceiling fans and dryers, a couple changes that will apply. For ceiling fans, it's just a change in what you're looking for on the energy guide. You're looking for something that says energy use watts. You might have looked at the labeled, the LCFSW, which was the labeled ceiling fan standardized watts before. So you're just changing what you're looking for on the energy guide. For clothes dryers, you probably were not documenting this before, so it's just going to be, I would assume, some kind of drop down that says, is the clothes dryer vented or is it ventless? And these inputs will affect the HERS index. It affects the calculations. It might not amount to the HERS index actually changing, right? These affect the calculations, but you might not even notice a change in your HERS index. And again, Neil will talk about the changes that are being introduced that will have an impact. And that's a good segue to this one, which will have an impact if you are doing CFIS. And so let me spend a few minutes on this one. CFIS is Central Fan Integrated Supply System. This is introduced through Addendum E. And Valerie is going to, when she distributes the slide, she'll include a copy of Addendum E. Because again, this will not be in that print copy of 301-2022 that's online available from ICC. So there's a lot in this one. So the first thing is to just look at the new definition that was introduced. You know, CFIS is a blower fan, right? Your air handler is shown here, with a return side outdoor air intake duct that supplies outdoor air to the dwelling unit, okay? So this has just historically not been modeled well, appropriately, or consistently across the software. And so that was the goal of Addendum E, is to create consistency in how we calculate the energy impacts of a system like this. Now, we have footnotes within our standards. So this footnote says a CFIS system does not automatically qualify as a dwelling unit mechanical ventilation system. I'm going to talk about more of that on the next slide. And then CFIS is pervasive throughout 301 as well as impacts in 380 because it affects how we test and measure ventilation airflow. So it says additional criteria can be found in 380 throughout multiple sections in 3.1, right? So it connects to ventilation. It's introducing new things that you as a rater have to inspect. That's a minimum rated feature. That's the table of things that you have to inspect and how you go about inspecting them. That's in Appendix B. So let's talk about dwelling unit mechanical ventilation. So a dwelling unit mechanical ventilation system has to operate either continuously or through a programmed intermittent schedule consisting of powered equipment, related mechanical components, and automated control devices. And it has to provide dwelling unit ventilation at a known or measured flow rate. So most CFIS systems will not rise to the level of being called dwelling unit mechanical ventilation systems. Some will, if they're on an intermittent schedule and you have a known or measured airflow, but a lot of CFIS systems will not. There are some footnotes here. So 16 is just, motor driven fans and blowers. The mechanical components in footnote 17, we're talking about like ducts and dampers. And automated control devices is just trying to say that even if you have just a switch or a special thermostat setting, like a vent on mode, that's not what we're saying when we say it has to be automatic, right? It has to be scheduled. It doesn't require user intervention to create, to bring in that ventilation air. So now, what does that all mean? If it doesn't rise to meeting this definition for dwelling unit mechanical ventilation, that means your CFIS is still going to be modeled in your rated home. It just means that the reference home will not have CFIS. So all the energy implications associated with this CFIS of using your air handler to bring in outdoor air, that will be modeled for the rated home, but not for the reference home. So that can have a modeling impact depending on how your software handles it right now. Again, Neil will touch on this later. So what does that mean to you as a rater in the field if you have a CFIS system? You have some documentation requirements that are new. You have to document how that outdoor air is controlled. Is there a mechanical damper or some other flow control to prevent the outdoor air from entering the home when it's not called for? The primary blower fan control strategy, does it run on a fixed timer or does it just run when there's a call for heating and cooling? you'll have to document how is it going to meet the ventilation target if it is just on for heating and cooling. Is there another fan, like another exhaust fan or another supply fan, or is there just no strategy? It's not providing the rest of the ventilation. Um, if there is a separate fan, how much energy does that fan use? Does it, you're going to document its schedule, how much air it brings in, and its power. And then if you weren't already, you're going to collect the blower fan model number. And then in terms of testing, as I mentioned, 380 comes into play. You are also going to measure the airflows for each operational mode. It's a lot of changes, but only impacts you if you have a CFIS system. So some other non-CFIS HVAC changes for forced air distribution systems, you have to model the duct area. I put this in blue, but it might not really affect you because there is a default, so you can just accept the default rather than calculating the actual duct area. Some of you might have been using this duct leakage test default as introduced through a Minhers amendment before. So there is an option if you don't want to test your ducts, you can use this default, but the criteria is pretty stringent, right? If you want to use this default, everything has to be in conditioned space volume, the ducts and the air handler. You cannot use building cavities as ducts. Some codes still allow that, some codes don't, but we said you cannot use this default if you have building cavities being used as ducts. And the final criteria to have that non-test default is that the ducts can't even be located within assemblies that are adjacent to unconditioned space volume or exterior. For example, in my own home, I have a floor above a garage. I have ducts running in that floor assembly. That would not allow me to use this default. I would have to test the ducts. And then finally, we've always had a default for ductless systems, so you don't have to test that. That got expanded to include some systems that have very short duct runs, but we had to clarify that the duct runs had to be less than 10 feet. They had to include ductwork in even the building cavities that are being used for distribution. And we had to clarify that the short duct run has to be inside conditioned space volume. So some of these things you might have been doing already or might not apply to you, but these are all changes coming as of July. The ventilation system control is kind of related to what we are talking about CFIS. You're going to have to document whether it's continuous or whether it's programmed or intermittent. This is the SEER 2 and HSPF conversions that you've been using through a Minhers amendment all this time, but now it's been codified. It's part of 301-2022 officially. So moving on to hot water. This is just kind of a change in your practice. When you download your HRI for your water heater, you're probably grabbing the UEF. So you're also going to have to remember to grab the first hour rating. And there's some slight changes to your on-site protocol. So when you're looking at low flow fixtures, pipe insulation, and pipe length, very minor changes, but I'm going to walk through each one. For low flow fixtures, the language on the left is what used to be stated in Appendix B. You're grabbing the rated GPM on all shower heads and faucets. We wanted 2022 to be more specific and tied directly to the credit you are allowed to take. So within the software, you can only get credit if all bathroom sink faucets and shower heads are either equal to 2.0 GPM or less. Then you can do low flow. So we had to be clear that's not kitchen faucets. We're not looking at kitchen faucets. It's only bathroom faucets. And if you had even one of those that are above 2.0 GPM, then you're just taking the credit for standard faucets. You cannot get credit. There's no pro rating. It's all or nothing. And there's also language added about showers that might have multiple shower heads, right? If they operate all at the same time, it doesn't matter that each one is 1.5 GPM. If you have 7 of them running at the same time, that's not low flow. So that language had to be added to the standard. In terms of pipe insulation, we kept a lot of this language, but again, made it specific to the credit. A lot of you might see in your software that it's kind of just a fixed credit. It's either R3 or not. So we wanted to align the inspection protocol with that. So you're recording if the R value is at least R3. If it's R5, R7, R10, it doesn't matter. The credit is the same. It's just whether you can take credit or not. So you basically have to have R3 or not. And we wanted the language to kind of align with that a little bit better. And for pipe length, the language didn't quite match what's in the standard. So in the standard, we talk about how we measure it. And so that's been added to Appendix B. So you guys are measuring it the same way that it's calculated by the software, and wanted to clarify that that vertical pipe length, the one running between floors vertically, it's 10 feet for each conditioned floor level, and then 5 feet for unconditioned basement. So there was a lack of language in what you guys do as raters in Appendix B that's causing a disconnect between how it's implemented in the software. So we're hoping that's improved. I'm gonna just fly through these last 3 slides. Again, I wanted them accessible to you, so when Valerie sends it to you, you have them, you don't have to go searching for them. These are some new definitions. Some, again, will be in that online copy, that free viewer copy, some won't. So I just wanted to copy them in here. Some might not really impact you on a day-to-day, but you might be interested to see, there's a new definition for attic and for bathroom. Some other options here. That first hour rating, if that's not familiar to you, you can read the definition there. Again, the renewable energy certificate, I think that's an interesting one because we had to add that. So a bunch of definitions, again, not reading them to you, just wanted you to have them in a handy resource because not all of them will show up in that viewer. Now, some quick changes before I get close to handing this off to Neil. CFA, conditioned floor area. Some of you might have noticed that the CSV, the conditioned space volume definition, was slightly different when you're talking about dwelling units that are adjacent to each other and share a wall assembly. So the CFA definition was just revised to align with that. The dwelling unit mechanical ventilation system, we've already talked about this. This was what was new, was about what do we think a automatic control looks like. And so we looked at that before when we were talking about CFIS systems. Multifamily buffer boundary and unrated heated space. These are things typically in multifamily buildings. This has no impact on you as a rater, but behind the scenes in terms of software consistency, these definitions were changed to make sure all the software were calculating or simulating these with the same temperature settings. And then last is purchase energy. This was something that came up, I think, through an interpretation request about on-site solar. So the policy was that on-site solar, whether it was purchased or leased or bought through a power purchase agreement, that all constituted on-site power production, which helps reduce your HERS index. And so this was an edit needed to this definition of purchase energy to exclude the ones that are purchased through a on-site power purchase agreement. So some quick things that Neil might not touch on. These are all in purple text. Probably doesn't impact you a lot, but some changes had to be made within the software to ensure that all the software developers implement it the same way. If a rated home has multiple pieces of equipment, we want the reference home to also have multiple pieces of equipment serving the same end use, whether it's space heating or water heating. In terms of water heaters, we used to prorate. If you're thinking about a multifamily building with the big water heater, we had to figure out a way to divide that fairly amongst all the dwelling units in the multifamily building. We used to prorate it by dwelling units evenly. And then somebody brought up, well, a studio versus a 3-bedroom apartment, they use different amounts of hot water. Maybe it should be prorated by the number of bedrooms. So it's more similar to like how much water they use. And so that's a change that was made. These last two, I don't think really happen all that often, but I'll mention them. If you have a home without a proposed water heater or multiple proposed water heaters, again, some things that are changing kind of behind the scenes don't really impact what you do as a rater. MNHERS addenda. So this is one I do want to flag this one because there are some things, right? You've seen that 301 copy, it's online. You either have links to some of the addendum that were to the ANSI addendum. Here's a MNHERS. So this is a RESNET addendum. Went into effect back in December. This means if you're using the CMU blocks and you're using the foam-filled insulation strategy, there wasn't a grade 1 inspection protocol, so we use an interim addendum to make that available very quickly. But it was only permitted if you use these default R values that were introduced. And so I'm just flagging this because this hasn't been finalized, but I won't be presenting to you guys again this year. So I just want you guys to keep a heads up for addendum 83F. This will be part of something you might have to do this year or towards the end of the year. Again, only matters if you're doing CMU block construction. There will be default R values that you will have to follow. The implementation might not be July 1st, but just to give you a heads up that is coming. And then addendum 46 and 76. 76 is the one that says, hey, we're going to switch to 301, 380, 2022 starting July 1. Addendum 46 is the one that says we're going to switch to the new version of Chapter 6 for sampling. So we get this question a lot. There used to be a guidelines for multifamily energy ratings, and people still ask whether they can use those. And the answer is no, they cannot be used. Even right now, they should not be used except for sampling. And then once we reach that July 1st date, nobody should be using it at all, right? The RESNET sampling in Chapter 6 is what you should be using for multifamily ratings. The RESNET guidelines will just be completely sunset. So I just want to answer that question because we do get that one quite a bit. 380, very minor changes. It's possible we might need to do a separate webinar on this because I do want to switch things over to Neil. But I asked the chair of that subcommittee to just kind of highlight any key changes, and it's very minor. So you might want to take a look at 380 online and see if there's any different setups. It's mostly due to any mechanical openings. Some of the setups might change. And there are new options for using passive resistance devices when measuring ventilation airflow. So again, if testing is something that you really are concerned about, check out these 2 slides. If you need your training providers to offer more guidance or RESNET to provide a dedicated webinar on this topic, just let us know. And so with that, I think I'm going to hand things off to Neil.
Okay. Thanks, Guthrie. So I'm going to start just by giving an update on the software update timeline, because things have changed a little bit since the way that we've updated standards in the past. So RESNET is actually enacting a new policy to review the impact of standards, any of these updates, before the Standards Management Board sets the voluntary and mandatory compliance dates for the standards. So this time around, I, as the Energy Modeling Director of RESNET, coordinated with the software providers to get beta versions of their software in October of 2024. And that enabled me and my team to do an impact analysis where we run different homes in different climates to try to get an idea of what the impact will be for the raters themselves and on the ratings that the software is producing. So with that impact analysis that we shared with the Standards Management Board, they set these deadlines that Gayatри's been talking about. So we're currently in the voluntary compliance phase. Some software will be available. You can start running it to see yourself for your more specific cases what the impacts are going to be. This is just a quick summary of the software changes and their impacts, kind of by the documents that they come from. So for 2022, we have 2 changes, and you can see the changes. So like the EVE insulation change might have up to a 1-point increase in the HERS index. And so I'm going to go into each of these in a little more detail, but I wanted to highlight a few here. The biggest impact that raters will see is related to central fan integrated supply systems, where the ducts are located in an unconditioned space. And that's, you'll see a +1 to +7 HERS index increase, with the higher 7 points being in climates where that more extreme, like cold climates. Another change that Gayatri didn't really speak to is we are also adopting a new version of Publication 002, which is our software testing procedures. And this changes the acceptance criteria for the tests. And this impacted Ecotrope more than other software tools. And I'll get into a little more details about that shortly here. And then the final thing is, even independent of standards and publications, the software might find a bug in their calculations, and if they change that, there's a possibility that that will impact the HERS index as well. So right now, the different software tools have all submitted for accreditation. Ecotrope has kind of done it in 2 phases. They have one version 5.0 that's been approved. That includes 301-2022 with addenda A and B, and the changes to the acceptance criteria in Publication 002. And then we have a new version that adopts addenda C and E that should be, all of the ones under review here should be, are slated to be approved relatively soon. We have a few minor issues that we need to resolve with them. Energy gauge has been approved, room rate, and then the new software tool Apex is also under review. So just diving in deeper into these changes, Guthrie mentioned this already with Eve insulation. Basically, the way the software was treating ceiling insulation before, if the radar didn't separate out the center of the ceiling and the eaves themselves, the software was not accounting for the effect that the insulation, you have less insulation near the eaves of the home. And so if we apply, if you were using that assumption when your insulation really looks like this, then we expect that to be a 0 to 1 point increase, and 1 point being in the colder climates where that is more important. So not a huge impact there. Here's just a quick example. This was with the beta versions before we received a beta version from REMrate, and you can see, up to 1 point, but in a lot of the more mild climates, you may not even see an impact when it's rounded to the nearest HERS index score. The next change is we have standard 2019 on the left and standard the 2022 standard on the right. These are the default framing fractions, and 2022 kind of simplified things. It removed a lot of the differentiation between floors and ceilings, and it changed the standard default framing fraction to increase for walls. And so overall, the walls framing fraction increased, but the ceilings decreased depending on what type of ceiling you're using. Before, if you were using standard or conventional, it would have decreased. And the net impact of this was virtually 0. This won't impact your scores at all. Then for addendum C, like Guthrie said, these are mostly just assumptions that we wanted to make sure we're happening consistent in the software. So material thermal properties assumptions, soil, wood, and drywall, infiltration metrics. So all the standards have conversions between, the different ways you can measure infiltration, and going from ACH to specific leakage area to effective leakage area to CFM. So we added this whole table basically of equations that the software needs to follow. And depending on how the software were handling these conversions before, there may not be any change, but some software, there will likely be some changes. We also added hourly schedules. We had a working group that looked at the various schedules that are applied for our, all of our tools now are hourly. So when lighting is on, for example, won't necessarily impact the HERS index so much. We did this mostly for the carbon index, which does depend on the time of day that the energy is used. So these schedules are in there. We don't anticipate that this is going to impact the HERS index, but it will impact the carbon index. And then the last one here for addendum C is interior shading. Instead of having different shading factors that are assumed for the summer and winter, we just have a single value that's based on the solar heat gain coefficient for the home, whether that's the reference home or the rated home. And overall, the changes in addendum C, depending on the software tool, of course, and what assumptions they had been using before, will have a -1 to a +1 impact on the HERS index. Addendum E, the CFIS systems. This was the biggest impact, as I mentioned earlier. And what we had found in the software tools is when you're in a ventilation mode, you're bringing outdoor air in through a damper, and you're mixing that with return air. The fan is blowing and kind of cycling air through the system, or through the system and from the conditioned space volume. And as that conditioned air mixes and then it goes through the ducts in an attic or any unconditioned space, really, the ducts are basically acting as a giant heat exchanger, and you're losing heat through that process of circulating that room air with the outdoor air. And so this impact is now modeled. It's enforced in this statement here in the new standard. And so this is where we see the biggest change. This is a +1 to +7, depending on your climate zone. So, and I'll show some results in a bit here. The next change is for publication 002. This is our procedures for verification of RESNET accredited HERS software tools. And in this document, we have several cases that each software tool has to run. And this is a bit dated of a chart, but I just want to illustrate here. So this is the tool's ability to predict heating loads. And you can see, we start with like a base case, we change the infiltration, change insulation, improve the windows, and we have different variations just to see, are the tools giving the correct kind of sensitivity and are they falling within these bounds? These bounds, these old criteria were based on simulation tools that were considered state of the art in the mid 90s. But simulation technology has come a long way since then. And so we've proposed new acceptance criteria. And this makes a moving target for the software, and especially Ecotrope, which had aligned better with the REM seasonal engine and the legacy reference tools. And so we've given all the tools, including Ecotrope, time to adjust to these new requirements. And Ecotrope made changes in their 5.0 software to improve the way that they were modeling windows, foundations, and ducts. And so they're now within these acceptance criteria that align more with the other tools. And these improvements, unfortunately, will change the scores as well. And that's a kind of natural consequence of any change, whether it's even if it's making the rating more accurate. And so it's kind of a spread from -4 to +3, but mostly pretty close, kind of hovering around 0. And I'll show some examples of that. And I think Ecotrope also is helping communicate the impact to its users related to this. So to test all the changes in the standards, we have set up what we call our multi-climate test suite. We start with a base case home, which is effectively the index adjustment design home. And then we make subtle changes, different modifications. So that might be changing the foundation type, changing the ventilation system. And we model that in 5 different climates in the US, kind of spanning from climate zone 1 to climate zone 7. And we use this test suite to understand the impact anytime a new software tool is released, to make sure that there aren't inadvertent changes, and to also make sure that we're not decreasing consistency across tools when a new software is released. Again, this base case is based on the index adjustment design. This is specified in the 301 standard. And then some of the features that aren't specified in the index adjustment design are just set to be fairly simple. So we assume it already has a raised heel truss, the 2022 default framing fractions, balanced mechanical ventilation, ducts and conditioned space. So between these two, we wouldn't see the impact of CFIS, but then one of our modifications is to add a CFIS system and put the ducts in the attic, and so we can see the impact there. The building also has a vented crawl space to kind of isolate it mostly from the impacts of the ground. So overall, we have, I think, a combination of 26 cases. The base case, we have a few cases changing the foundation type, changing the windows, and then specifically for the CFIS and ventilation cases, we added those in Duluth, but not the other cases because the impact is going to be seen greatest where the outdoor temperatures are most extreme. And so overall, these are just examples from the base case and energy gauge. You can see between their previous version, that was 2019, and their new version, which is adopting the 2022 standard, there's very little changes here. But if you look at like this case here, where we have the CFIS system with ducts and attic, you can see that there's actually a 4-point increase in the HERS index in this case. So if we take all of our cases, all 26 cases, and we look at this difference and we plot that on a histogram, you can see this is the changes that we expect for Energy Gauge USA users. With most of our changes, the Appendix C changes, kind of hovering minus to +1, but then you have the one case out here, which is the CFIUS ductinatic case. Things are a little different for REM rate right now, and I should also mention that these are preliminary because, again, we're still working with some of the software providers and accrediting their software, so the results could change. What we're seeing here in REM rate right now is in this process of accreditation, we've helped them identify an issue with how they were applying attic insulation in their models. And so that will have an impact depending on these cases on the left are, I believe, the warmer climates, and then the cases on the right are the colder climates. So you can see the overall shift here is going to increase scores, and then you have the ductinatic with the CFIUS system again here. Ecotrope, like I mentioned, they have the spread mostly related to the improvements to their modeling algorithms related to the new acceptance criteria in publication 2 that kind of aligns them with more the state-of-the-art simulation software, and then again the ductinatic case with the CFIUS system out here. We did have Ecotrope provide us with few intermediate versions. So this alpha version that they sent us, this was just applying the publication 02 stuff. So you can see the spread here. It's the scale had changed, but it's, you know, that -4 to 3 spread just related to those acceptance criteria. And then if you look just at the changes related to the standards, the new standards updates, you see the spread around 0 from the Appendix C or Addendum C, and then the one case out here from the CFIUS ductinatic. And when you combine them together, it actually pulls that back in, and you see a similar change to what the other tools are showing for that one case. So that's the biggest case, the biggest difference. There's also differences related to publication 02 acceptance criteria. So that's most of what I have. I just wanted to wrap up with some conclusions here. So the updates to the RESNET standards will make ratings more accurate. Now, some of the consequence of any time we make a change to make things more accurate is that it will impact the HERS score. And we acknowledge that that's going to have, you know, that's going to have time for the industry, the stakeholders to adjust and understand what the impact of those are going to be for their specific market. There are new software tools available now that you can start working with to help understand those changes so you can communicate them. And I encourage everyone to start testing as soon as possible so that you can understand these before that July 1st mandatory compliance deadline. And that is all I have. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you both, Gayatri and Neil. We have a few questions in the question box. I'm going to go kind of in the order that they were received for whatever amount of time we have. Gayatri, I think during your segment, there was a question regarding, will rated roof products match the 301/2022 standard?
I've been trying to answer those questions to the individual. So hopefully individuals that typed in questions where I could answer them quickly, I did that one. This one, I'm not sure if the individual is still on. I wasn't actually sure what they meant by rated roof products because they capitalized those terms. I don't know, Neil, if this is ringing a bell from your slides. I just don't have the context of when that got put into the chat.
Yeah, I wonder if it's related to the color, surface colors.
Yeah,
right,
there were some questions regarding that, yes.
So there's always, if something is rated with like current, I think there's an ASTM standard, then you can use that to input a value. But if it's just observing like the color, the subjective color of a wall or a roof, then those then you need to use that the mapping that we have to the solar absorbance related to that color.
Okay. And we'll just do some of these aloud, guys, even if you haven't been able to answer them in written form. Does this additional CFIUS information make it clear that the wattage used by the air handler cannot be used as proportional amount to the airflow?
So Neil, this one has an example in it. I don't know if can you see the question, the actual question
I
in the
can't. I don't know
chat?
why. I can only see a few.
Okay.
Um,
Now it's disappeared. I'm a very visual person, so a question with that example, but it's gone now,
yeah,
Valerie.
I think so.
I
There's
could try reading it again.
yeah,
This additional CFIS information make it clear that the wattage used by the air handler cannot be used as proportional amount to the airflow. For example, a 2-ton system nominal airflow of 800 CFM uses 1400 watts, and the CFIS system has a tested airflow of 20 CFM, meaning the mechanical ventilation system is modeled with 35 watts, with 0.025 being pulled from 20 over 800.
right. I think it depends on how the fan is controlled, but um, I think that's right. I think a lot of the CFIS systems will kind of use the fan at that, at the same speed that it's using for for heating or cooling, and the wattage then is what should be applied, even though the outdoor air might be kind of cycling on and off to get an average airflow to meet the ventilation requirements. The wattage still has to be the actual wattage from the fan. I think hopefully that helps.
Okay. Do we know when addendum 83I will go into effect for ANSI?
So 83I is an interim addendum to RESNET. And so
Mhm.
what'll happen is we will finalize the language. This is one about the foam-filled CMU blocks. And so I think they're asking, like, it contain a grade 1 inspection protocol and some default R values that must be used. So it's a 2-step process. What'll happen is that'll get finalized as a RESNET addendum sometime this year. And then we are currently using addendum D to contain those same requirements. So we folded it into addendum D. Like I mentioned, addendum D is an insulation grading revision. And so when this was brought to our attention that there wasn't a grade 1 protocol for the foam filled CMU blocks, we put it into addendum D, which will go out for public comment again sometime in April, I think. And it will also contain those default R values. So in terms of being an ANSI addendum, it would be contained through addendum D. We just don't have the timeline of when that would be finalized because it still has to go through public comment.
Great, thank you. Is an ERV that has a supply side connected to the return of a central air handler considered a CFIS?
What do you think, Neil? I would say yes. It seems to
Well,
meet the
yeah,
definition, but
if it
go ahead.
if the airflow through it is controlled, right, to meet the ventilation requirements. But I guess no, right. So the CFIS system doesn't necessarily meet the requirements for a dwelling unit mechanical ventilation system, but I think that would qualify for as a CFIS system. It just may not qualify for the dwelling unit mechanical ventilation requirements.
Okay.
Does that sound right, Catherine?
That does sound right. I could see, I think their question is, I do agree that it meets the definition of CFIS. The point
Yeah.
is you get it's a kind of a neutralized modeling impact. It gets a little bit more neutralized if the reference home also has CFIS, right? And so I think the question is, yes, when you connect that ERV, it is introducing outdoor air. You're gonna have to document the wattage of this supplemental fan, right? That ERV uses electricity to move air into the air handler system. So all those components have to be documented. So I believe it is considered CFIS. But in most cases, if it has the right controls and the right airflow, it could qualify as a dwelling unit mechanical ventilation system, in which case the reference home will have a CFIS system as well. So hopefully that answers that person's question.
Okay. Does addendum E include any requirements for the software tools to calculate heat loss gained through dwelling unit mechanical ventilation ducts connected to the HVAC system?
I think this question is asking like a separate ducting system just for mechanical ventilation that is connected to the distribution system for heating and cooling. It doesn't. And yeah, I don't think that those mechanical ventilation ducts, I don't know if they're even rating procedures to collect information about them to input into the software.
Okay. Do you know how many homes last year were rated with CFIS installed? If either you don't know, we can
Not,
certainly
not off the
look
top
it
of
up.
our heads, but that's something we could find out from the registry.
Yes, yes, yes. Let's see. Will the IEER efficiency for mechanical systems be incorporated into 301?
There are no proposals at this moment for that, but it could be. This would be IER for, I imagine, for multifamily units that have commercial size units, or I'm not sure exactly. Maybe typically IER is used for commercial HVAC systems, so not.
Okay, okay, great. And can we still use the default wattage for CFIS systems?
Yeah, so the wattage of a CFIS system has to be done, it has to be pulled, if it's using the same fan as your central HVAC system, then the wattage has to come from the same grading procedures that are done for the central system for heating and cooling. And if it is a separate, like a standalone fan that's coordinated in conjunction with the central system, then I believe that might be able to use a default, but I'm not sure.
All right, so far, those are all the questions we have. We have about 4 minutes out. Guy, or Neil, would either of you like to have some closing thoughts to share?
I was just going to suggest that the folks on the call, it seems like we had a lot of CFIS questions. So it's possible, Valerie, in this webinar schedule, if there's enough feedback from the folks here that they are interested in a dedicated webinar to CFIS, it seems like maybe we need more time to dive in a little deeper with more examples. That would
Absolutely,
be
I'm happy to
my
get that on the
remarks.
books with you all. Yep, we can do that. Neil, any closing thoughts?
Not for me, no.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you as always for your time and for the information you shared with us today. And then, as you suggested, Gayatri, we will look into an additional webinar addressing the CFIS questions and sort of the part of that standard specifically, since there was a lot of interest. Again, thank you for joining us today, everyone, on today's webinar. Again, as we mentioned, the slides will be made available after the webinar, along with a link to the recording for you to listen to again or share with your colleagues who weren't able to join us today. Feel free to check out the RESNET website in the future for new webinars as they get scheduled. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.